Meetings Act, the notice requirements have been satisfied. Meeting dates for the year are confirmed at the annual meeting, are posted on the public bulletin board in the lobby of the Municipal Center, and published in the record within the first 10 days of the new year. For the record, Councilman Barzalato, I believe, is expected, and expected, not expecting, and Councilwoman Hayter, I believe, is overseas still.
Okay.
This is a work session, so we open it up with opportunity for public comment. If there's anybody who would like to speak to the mayor and council on any item of concern to them, whether or not it's on the agenda, I'll go around the room once, and anybody that wants to speak. Do you have your hand up already? Okay.
Mark Feldman, 133 Longwood Drive. I'm not entirely sure what these agenda items mean, but in anticipation, I'm going to make a couple of comments. One is about the open space renewal referendum, which I assume is to either discuss or approve the wording of a ballot question to be put on in August, which is the deadline for submitting such questions.
Oh, Mark, I'll let you know that we have not discussed that at all to this point, so I would assume this is basically a preliminary discussion to decide, try and get a sense of what direction the council wants to move in this.
Okay, well, I had read that the Environmental Commission had already voted unanimously to support a new referendum on the subject. Anyhow, just to contribute to the discussion, I feel it's very important that if you're going to go to the public with a recommendation or with arguments on either side of the question, there actually has to be some resolution of the work of the subcommittee that you established 2 years ago to prescribe more clearly what open space money can be used for. As you know, there was a lot of controversy a couple of years ago when money was used from the Open Space Fund for the Geisinger Field, and I'm not going to relitigate that. I'm just pointing out that the attorney at that time said that open space money could be used for recreational enhancements like Geisinger Field, and there were people who, despite that, still didn't want it to be used that way. And that was the genesis for setting up this subcommittee so that going forward there would be a clearer idea on the part of the public and the governing body as to what to do with not only future monies but the existing roughly $2 million that's in there. So it seems to me premature to even talk about putting this back on the ballot for renewal until there has been a report going into the criteria that govern the current $2 million. And how that is, you may say, well, the subcommittee hasn't met, you're going to abolish it, you're just going to discuss it here. But all I'm saying is that now that we're clear that the current fund can be used for buying open space, recreational enhancements, and even buying historical properties, I think the public is going to want to know going into this referendum whether that's going to be in equal or in priority, and specifically what plans, if any, you have for the $2 million that's there, much less asking for more over the next 10 years. So, is the subcommittee still in existence?
Well, in all fairness, Councilwoman Lamastra was, I believe, on the committee with you, Mark.
It's me.
Anybody else?
No.
I don't believe it met, so
Right.
we'll talk about it tonight, and I think one of the discussion points would be whether or not to have a committee.
Because as you know, the wording for the referendum does not have to be given to the county clerk until August. Okay. My second point is in regard to what you may or may not discuss under old business about 19 Peter Linus Court. I went to the planning board meeting last week expecting that the planning board was going to vote on the subdivision of that property. But as you probably know, they postponed the decision for another month. And it was explained at that time that the only thing before the planning board at this time is whether or not to approve the subdivision. They're not being asked to opine on historical preservation, which was recommended by the HPC, or on any involvement of the borough with the property. Again, the context in which I'm raising this is that there have been a number of newspaper articles giving perhaps accurate, perhaps inaccurate information to the public, so that there's confusion out there as to what you really intend to do and what procedurally is going on. There's one procedural point I want to raise now without getting into the merits of the underlying proposal, is the question of recusal. And I know the criteria for recusal are different for the planning board, for the HPC, and potentially for the mayor and council. But it concerns me that the proposal, the application for the subdivision and for the historical designation is being made by an individual a couple, who lived in Tenafly for 40 years and were very prominent in the community and know a lot of people personally, some of whom may even be their close personal friends. And again, I don't know what the law says compared to what ethics would imply as a conflict of interest, but I think before you get into a deep discussion of what you want to do on this, each of the bodies I mentioned has to decide whether, on the basis of any relationship with the applicant, individuals, and I'm not suggesting anyone in particular, need to recuse themselves on the issue. I did notice, I tried to research what the HPC did. Unfortunately, the HPC doesn't produce its minutes in a timely manner, so it was hard for me to find out, sure, who said what and when, because the minutes for their March meeting have not even been published yet. But it was clear that during that discussion in the HPC, none of the members of the HPC, including people who are very close friends of the applicant, recused themselves from the discussion. And I would hate to see the planning board or the council get deeply involved in discussing this before the issue of recusal, if any, has been raised. Because it seems to me that looking at the essence of the proposal, depending on how the decision goes in the planning board on the subdivision, the decision could or could not result in close to $500,000 in value being created. So we wouldn't want personal considerations to come into that decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Going to go around. Anybody else care to speak? Okay, I'm going to close the public comment section. And our first item is the 2016 street resurfacing program, durability of asphalt review with the borough engineer, who is not here tonight but has sent somebody from his firm in his place, and our DPW director. So just keep in mind that when we say durability of the asphalt, I know I have made some comments how disappointed I am in the apparent life of the roads that we have had resurfaced over the last few years. And by the way, I was stopped at on West Clinton Avenue, which was done by the county, but nevertheless it was done just a couple of years ago. And I'm not talking about the half of the street that was redone by public service. I'm talking about the other half of the street. If you look at it, it's starting to deteriorate, and that's only, what, 3 years old, 4 years old?
No, that's old. That's 6, 7.
It's 6 or 7 years? Okay. Anyway, so, Bob, you want to take the lead on this?
Well, first I'd like to introduce Mike Okrepke from Mazer Consulting. And actually I'll let him start off this evening with a description of what's happened in the past regarding roadways to the present conditions and effects that the roadways are having, what they haven't had in the past and what they're up against now.
Thank you. To everyone, Andy Hiplick could not make it this evening. He's not feeling well. and so he sent me in his place. And I just want to, I discussed this this issue with him, and I just wanted to first go through the history as I understand it, as well as just a brief overview of how flexible asphalt is installed and proper maintenance and so forth. It is my understanding the main issues are regarding the flexible asphalt installation is the longevity, color, cracking, potholes, and as you stated, just the overall poor performance and longevity of the pavement. In general, flexible asphalt has a 10-year lifespan with proper maintenance, and proper maintenance is traditionally as follows: crack sealing every 2 years at a maximum interval, meaning maybe you do it every year if you see a lot of spalling and alligator cracks. They or maybe you wait 2 years to complete that maintenance procedure. Another maintenance procedure along with crack sealing is microsurfacing. The suggested time interval for that is 5 to 8 years, depending on the pavement and how it looks. And then pothole repair as needed. And also, where utility disturbances and installation are completed, infrared heat is used to blend the pavements. It's my understanding there is a ordinance that now passed in Tenafly that requires infrared heating to blend the pavements, and that does really help. In addition to proper maintenance, there are things that are also can impact pavement that are within your control, and some that are not. And some of those are the temperature at installation. Ideally, asphalt is placed at the correct temperature, and verified with heat gun. So when asphalt is taken from the plant, it leaves the plant, let's say, at 450 degrees, and I think the minimum required is 315 at installation. And that's verified with a heat gun, when it's laid down. So sometimes if they're doing construction and there's a traffic jam or there's a holdup, the asphalt can make it to the job site cold, and it should be returned. We, as consulting engineers, there's certain types of asphalt installation that we do not monitor. For example, utility installations, if PSE&G or Orange and Rockland, if they're in the town and they're doing a utility installation, that pavement, we don't know if that pavement was installed properly at the proper temperature. Another issue that can impact the conditions of flexible asphalt in its useful life is the temperature at installation, the ambient temperature. Ideally, the temperature outside should be 45 degrees Fahrenheit and rising, not on its way to a snowstorm or something like that. However, if you have an electric line or a water main break or sewer break in the middle of the winter, the repair has to be completed and under less than ideal conditions, and that's just the way it is. I mean, there's nothing that's something that you as a municipality cannot control. For another example, related to the weather, ambient weather, is the milling and pavement projects are scheduled for summer months to ensure the proper ambient temperatures of placement. And another item that impacts the pavement longevity is the surface material quality. The subsurface material quality. And that is the material that is underneath. You have your finished coarse asphalt, which is what you see when you drive, which is the smooth, fine 2 inches of material, usually 1 to 2 inches of material. Then there's about 4 to 6 inches of what's called base asphalt, which is they're larger stones. And then below that is subsurface, material. Subsurface materials is just a quarry process aggregate, sand and stone compacted. And, you know, when the municipality completes a milling and paving project, the subsurface material, other than certain potholes, is not addressed. So if there's an area with, had poor subgrade, during a milling and paving project, the subgrade is not addressed except for localized areas. And the reason why is it would be prohibitively expensive to do so. It is more financially sensible, and for the longevity and the value to the service life of the pavement, to put that money that would be spent on something like that into a more robust maintenance program. And then the last two items that can impact the asphalt performance is the depth of frost in winter. If it's a very cold winter, even if it doesn't snow, you can have the frost, if it gets down 3 or 4 feet, you can have heaving, and that cracks the asphalt pavement. And that would be the same for concrete. I just want to point that out. So a lot of times people talk about, like, okay, we could replace the flexible asphalt with concrete and get a superior life. When you have a lot of frost like that, it could impact it the same way. And that's something to consider. And then finally, the truck traffic and plowing. When you have truck traffic, the more heavier trucks, it impacts a pavement's life much more than a standard car, someone's private car. And then as well, snow plowing. If there's if you have a really bad year, or there's a lot of snowstorms, and you have a lot of snow plowing, that really can impact the serviceable life of asphalt. And so there's a lot of variables to it. I certainly hear what everyone's saying, like, hey, it appears that some of this asphalt is not performing well, and it may have been installed incorrectly, but also there's a lot of other variables as well that could impact the service life of the asphalt. And with that, I'll just turn it over to everybody for questions.
Bob, did you want to add anything?
Well, as Mike said, there are multiple factors that affect the roadway. Something that we have to take into consideration now also is the increased amount of truck traffic that you get on your local roads versus years ago. Now with the advent of the internet and online purchasing, your delivery trucks are down side streets that would very rarely see a large truck. Now you have delivery trucks multiple times going down the street during the day. Now you also have the advent of recycling, where you used to have a garbage truck once or twice a week on the street. Now you have them down 3 or 4 times per week on a side street. All this increased traffic and increased sizing of the vehicles degrades the roadway. All the proper maintenance techniques are in effect in Tenafly. We do the pothole repairs, we do the crack sealing, we do microsurfacing, we do milling, and we also do infrared, and we do our milling and paving. All 5 categories of pavement maintenance are being addressed, so we do have an aggressive pavement preservation program. Tongue twister there, but
when you're going to mill and pave streets, let's take 2 streets. One is, say, for example, like East Clinton, or West Clinton, it's a very busy street,
right,
versus a side street, and you're milling and paving both of them.
Mm-hmm.
Do you do the same process on both, despite the fact that one's very busy in a long trip?
Yes.
Okay.
When you're ready,
Let me just have a couple of questions, and you said there's a 10-year life. That's a rough expectancy
With proper maintenance, yes.
with proper maintenance. We have over 200 streets in Tenafly, so if you're going to use a 10-year life as a benchmark, that would say that in order to keep up with things, you'd have to do roughly 20 streets a year. We never have come close to that. So are you telling us that our expectations of maintaining our streets at this rate are unrealistic?
I think let me give you an example of yes and no, to answer the short answer. And yes, it's unrealistic, the fact that to say that every single road is gonna be maintained at this highest level of service. Okay, because level of service is what we're talking about. Now, there are some courts, let's say for example, that are very low traffic, and they can handle some spalling, you know, and some cracks in the asphalt, and maybe you know, because of the traffic count is very low, where you have thoroughfares that connect two county roads, that you really have to adhere to this schedule and you have to maintain a high level of service, otherwise it'll just break apart. So it depends on the traffic count, where it is. Like I said, if you had a small court, low traffic count, you can usually, you know, when I go through a town, when I evaluate a town, we prioritize roads. Those are the roads that you prioritize the lowest because they can handle, you know, a lower grade of service.
Are the county roads in our town, the maintenance of those, like crack sealing, and is that our responsibility or the county?
No, that's the county's
If you see a pothole in a county road, you call the county?
We advise the county.
Because I know they were up on the east and west Clinton. Infrared heat, the ordinance that we have.
Correct.
In your opinion, you've been here a few years now, is that enforced strictly enough?
Yeah, yes, it is.
So you're confident that when every utility that opens up a road knows it, and we keep track of that, we
Yep.
track it?
Yeah.
Cold asphalt, you mentioned that when asphalt gets here, it's gotta be of a certain temperature, otherwise it's not gonna do what it has to do. Who oversees that? Does our borough engineer oversee it? Do DBW oversee
No,
it?
it's usually the contractor, as he's doing the installation, he's using the infrared on the truck as he starts putting it into the street.
So we depend on the contractor who's...
Well, the contractor's not gonna wanna put down a cold load of asphalt, because if he does, it's not gonna lay down properly, it's gonna pull. And when it pulls, it almost looks like wrinkled tinfoil. It just starts to pull away, so they can't even lay it down properly. So he's not going to start putting that down and then have to take it up and reject that truck. He'd rather reject the truck before he even starts laying any blacktop down.
And utilities, when they install asphalt, there's no oversight of that? In other words, they're not regulating?
I'm not aware of any oversight that we handle.
Are you aware?
There's no regulation regarding their oversight for the repair of their trench. It's up to the individual community to stay
But
on top of that.
I'm talking about this community. If somebody, when it's one of the less traveled roads, that they have to open it up for a new construction or something, do we oversee that at all?
We inspect their trenches and we keep our eye on it. If it fails prematurely, we call them up and they come back and they repair it. We've had good success with the utilities.
And my last question, cold weather, you say, well, you know, if there's a necessary repair which requires opening the street in the winter when it's really too cold to do it, we can't make them come back and redo. I mean, it doesn't make more sense to do a temporary patch?
What they normally do is they put a base, they use base over the winter, and then in the spring, they come back and they do a finish repair on it.
Okay. Anybody else? First Mark and then Max, please.
Is it possible to use a better quality of asphalt and base and wind up, incrementally more cost, but it would last longer? And what's the
Are you
level?
talking about the surface course or?
The surface, the base, the whole thing. Is there a better way of doing this that would make it last 20 years instead of 10?
I mean, this side of rebuilding the roads with a large subbase, when I'm coming in and let's say we're going to reconstruct our roads in our community to like the Parkway, the Turnpike, with 1 foot of aggregate and so forth. Yes, that'll improve the longevity, but I think the cost would be prohibitive in the sense that the life cycle cost, it wouldn't make sense. It would be cheaper for the community to repave the roads as they break down than to try to do that once.
So just as a general, just toying with it, so let's say we did it that way. How long would the payback be? Would it be 50 years, 100 years? It wouldn't pay at all?
I don't believe it would pay at all because of the traffic count and,
Okay.
and the amount of community. It really has to be high volume. I always make this expression as it's what everyone else is doing, and the reason why is because that it is what makes sense, financially, and what is most effective for the taxpayers.
Okay.
Okay, so this year we're gonna spend $1 million something, $1.2 million or so in repaving streets. As you said, there are two types of milling and paving, and resurfacing, or, you know, the town has adopted as a procedure mostly resurfacing. Is that correct?
We do all types. We do resurfacing, and we also do preservation, which is the microsurfacing. So they'll be
Microsurfacing.
doing both milling and paving and microsurfacing.
But in the budget that we have right now, the majority is gonna be in microsurfacing,
No, the majority is in milling
No,
and paving.
milling paving.
milling paving.
Yes.
We just did a resurfacing on Magnolia where I live,
Mhm.
so I know that is a fact. And the road, after less than 2 years, it's completely degraded. So the question I have, well, Mark was asking, is there a better quality of asphalt that we can use without going through the entire rebuilding, but buying a better quality of asphalt for a incremental low price?
Now I understand the question you're asking.
Yeah, for an
yes.
incremental low price that would increase the life and would increase the return of our investment, rather than just keeping the lowest grade available.
Let me first start out by saying that New Jersey Super Pave is traditionally the standard that's used on all roads. And the maximum allowable is, I think for surface course, I think is, I believe it's 15% recycled asphalt. So that's the maximum amount of recycled asphalt that's allowed. Certain manufacturers, certain suppliers, I know, for example, Weldon is an asphalt supplier. They supply most of their mixes have no recycled product in it. So overall, the quality of asphalt that's available in New Jersey and that meets the Super Pave standard is very high. There's only an incremental amount, where you arguably would get an improvement, is where you have a product from a manufacturer that has no recycled asphalt in it. That would improve it. How much? There's a lot of journals that they write different things about it. What percentage you would get. Again, you have all these other variables. It's hard for me to say. It's not like you're going to improve. You pay 10% more and you get 30% more life. I can't answer that question because there's so many variables.
Can you answer the question, what's the price differential between the 15% recycled versus 0% recycled?
Almost none. It's almost depending on where it's depending the location where you get it from. Like for example, I know that Tilcon, they have a recycled asphalt. Whatever the state allows, they're closer to that limit. And like I mentioned, Weldon asphalt. I know I'm familiar with them. Weldon asphalt uses very little, if any, recycled asphalt.
Why would you use a 15% recycled asphalt if the
Right.
price differential is close to nothing? Why wouldn't you just go with the 100%?
Because the location of where Weldon's plant may be farther than Tilcon's plant from here. So the in-place installed cost may actually be more from Weldon. It's the cost of material is.
Can we find out about this? Because we're looking to save every penny. And at the same time, for that, we're looking to get the best available.
Yeah, I think what we need, what the councilman is saying, and I agree with it 100%, is we want you to do an analysis. When I say you, I'm talking about our borough engineer, before we go out to bid, to give us a recommendation as to whether you think it's worth our while to consider a better product.
Let me just also say that as long as it meets the standard of Super Pave, that's what they're selling, and it's kind of like, that's what they're selling that day. I know it's a great amount of money to this municipality and the taxpayers of this community. That these types of dollars you're talking about, millions of dollars, but to an asphalt plant to say that we're going to make a special mix for Tenafly,
You just said that we don't have to go a special There are plans that specifically do that.
Correct.
But we don't select the plan.
But we can. That's the whole point.
You
We
could,
can select the plan.
you could do that,
Drive your car.
but perhaps the cost would be prohibitively more.
That's what we need to
that's what
find
we
out.
need
And that's
to
what you need to
find
find out.
That's what
Okay.
we need to find out to make a decision.
Anything else, folks? Okay,
And another thing, before we leave, based on our analysis, we were told that microsurfacing is very effective in the areas where we do not have to do milling and paving and stuff like that. If I remember right from what you said, milling and paving is about 10 years with a proper maintenance. Microsurfacing is about 6 years with a proper maintenance. Is that correct?
It extends the
Additional.
life.
Right.
Yes.
It's additional.
Yeah, keep in mind,
years.
microsurfacing is
Yeah,
maintenance.
so it's basically, we can put a microsurface, it's
You
by,
can't.
and you
There's
get them.
there's two issues. One is that not every road is eligible for microsurfacing.
We understand that.
And the other is that if you take two roads and mill and pave one and microsurface the other, you're gonna say that that mill and pave road is a much better finished
Yeah.
product. So it's not
But
like
that's
we
it,
wanna eliminate, well, first of all, we couldn't eliminate milling and paving anyway, because so many of our roads are not eligible, they've
Anymore.
deteriorated
I'm-
beyond the
I'm
point
just
of
trying to
micro.
understand, the ratio between the two costs, do you have that?
It's,
When you're saying letting, not doing the microsurfacing?
No,
What's
we're
the ratio
comparing the price of a microsurfacing versus.
Per mile,
milling
for
and
example,
paving.
whatever
Which
you-
I'm sure you have that.
Yes, yes, I
And
do.
I'm
Yeah.
also confident that our engineer, along with our DPW director, analyze each of the roads that need to be repaired, and they
I
portion
understand,
it
we just
out,
need to
so that's
understand
already
the
being
cost.
done, but I
So
think.
together with the cost of the actual asphalt, the specific plans,
Mm-hmm.
we need also to understand that ratios when those decisions are made.
Okay, thank you. And nothing else, guys? No ladies, no council. Okay, thank you very much, I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Tree planting, yeah?
I'm not getting.
All right.
And do we have any specific questions?
We have a lot of questions.
Okay.
Well, first of all, as a general use, we had 2 years ago a referendum that basically split the town in two, was dramatic and stuff like that. And there was about 80 trees being cut, or 100, maybe 100. Anyhow, so the idea is the cutting of the trees. Recently, we were cutting a lot of trees in town for maintenance, but we did not plant any trees. So we basically start getting a deficit in our Tenafly, a tree town of trees. And all of a sudden we're cutting a lot of trees. Now, very recently, I got a ton of complaints about trees being cut on Magnolia Avenue where I live. And like everything else, I went to basically educate myself. I looked in Google, check how do you check a tree if it was cut, if it's sick or not, and stuff like that. And I went to go to see all the trees that were cut. There were trees cut in front of the
Mormon school.
Mount School, and there were trees cut down toward Highwood. One tree of all the one that it has a split. The rest of them were cut clean. I looked at the color. I called my wife to ask the colors because I'm not so sure. Everything according to Google were that the trees were okay.
According to Google,
Yeah,
the trees were okay.
I tried to understand from Google.
Every one of our trees that the DPW takes down
Well, except for
is
one.
analyzed by an arborist,
Let him
which
answer.
may not be as
Maybe
much
not
as
be.
Google to you, but
Okay,
please.
So I went to.
I don't want misinformation to be
No,
spewed
I
out
tell you
here.
exactly. According to what I read in Google, everything were okay with one street, which was split in the middle, and then I have. Then basically people came to me and said, we used to stay over there by to get the kids out of school, and there were shade trees and stuff like that. They're not anymore. Do you know why they were cut? I said, no, but I'll find out. Then I went up to the Nature Center to talk to Mr. Ponzi, who was the director of the Nature Center, to to understand what is their policy in cutting trees or not. And he basically said it's not the same thing in town, but it's what they have over there as a policy. And that was basically, unless it's immediate danger, a specific immediate danger, they don't cut any trees because, you know, the birds and the squirrels and everything, they live over there, that's part of nature. So now I need to understand, we killed so many trees.
No, we didn't kill trees.
First
We
of all,
didn't
before
plant
you-
a single one of them.
Before you go any further, the
Because,
4 trees that were cut down in front of Warm School,
yeah,
there was a request from the Board of Education to remove those trees because limbs were falling down, and it was only a matter of time till a limb hit a child or a parent waiting for a child. The trees were analyzed by our arborist.
well, let's
and
hear the
declared-
arborist. I want to hear the personally, rather than you being the.
Well, you listen to Google. I know
I
that as much. mean,
I
come
search
on.
in Google to make sure that I don't make mistakes.
Well, you're making a mistake now because
Well,
you.
let's see the arborist tell you now.
Okay.
Well, we did have a request from the Board of Education regarding the trees in front of Warm School. They had had numerous occasions where they had large limbs falling, and they had had enough. The tree risk hazard assessment was done, and these trees fell in the category of it's between 7 and 8. Now, we did take some pictures prior to the removals, and I'll pass them around. As you can see in this tree, you can see the size of the limb that was coming out. That's 1/3 of the canopy of the tree. Another picture of another tree, same thing. Another picture of another Norway where over 50% of the tree is gone. Another tree with the rotted root base. Another tree with the hollow in the interior. And what you see here are pictures of the limbs that were taken down. This is from the canopy. You can see the rot in the middle of the tree. They were compromised, their trees are in decline, and after doing a tree hazard assessment at the location, it was determined that removal was warranted. The Board of Education had no issue with the removal. They actually welcomed it, and the Board of Education is going to be doing some repairs to their raised planter gardens. And then after the repairs, those repairs aren't going to be done until school's closed, so their maintenance staff can go in, make the repairs that they want to make in front of the Warm School. And then after that, they've spoken with our tree foreman, Mr. Schmidt, and he's agreed to plant the trees when they are ready for planting.
And when are they gonna be ready for it?
When the school calls me and tells me that they're done making
What
their
about the
repairs.
trees in the other, we were talking about planting trees, Terrell, that we didn't do anything.
How many trees did we plant last year?
60 trees,
60 trees.
60 or
Okay.
62 trees.
Okay. We do have.
We just picked up 20 trees today from the nursery, and
Okay,
they're gonna
we've
start planting.
we've had a policy now for a number of years that any resident that wants a tree planted in front of their homes in the right of way
Mhm.
needs only to request it, and they get a tree.
And they get a tree, that's correct.
So we are, I know, I can tell you that Bob, first of all, spends an inordinate amount of time on trees. Second of all, he fights with residents who call up and say, I want this tree taken down in front of my house because it's not safe, or I'm afraid it's gonna land on my house during the next storm. He goes out, and if the tree is not really necessary to cut it down, he won't cut it down. And when residents come in for a tree permit, which they're required to do in order to take down a tree on private property, and if there's no construction, if you'd like to sit at the table for a few minutes and just make your presentation, that's fine.
Actually,
You want
it's
rather
not-
stand?
I can do it here.
Okay.
Actually, it's not a presentation. We just simply want to make sure that there are no obstacles to going ahead with what you've already approved. And we were told that if we presented the guidelines, which I think were in your packet,
Mhm.
that would go a long way toward facilitating the next step, which is to purchase the van and to hire the people necessary to support this service. So, assuming, we have put together these recommendations based on what other towns do with their programs, because many towns in Bergen County already have this up and running. The county itself has programs, and we debated quite actively in the last 2 sessions of the committee how Tenafly might be different and what our priorities were, and therefore what you see in front of you is a consolidation of what the majority on the committee felt should be the initial guidelines. And I have to emphasize that this is a work in progress, so that once we buy the van, it gets publicized, we see what the demand is, then we're going to review it within 6 months. And if you want, we can come back to you specifically and say, this is what our experience is, this is what it costs, this is how many people used it, and maybe we'll change some of the guidelines. And if it's wildly successful beyond our immediate dreams, we'll come proposing other things. And this is linked in a way with the work of our outreach person, who I hope, with Jul's help, will be hired by June or so that we can have the person in place during the second half of the year. Because part of what the outreach person will do is to contact people who are homebound in particular and make them aware of the existence of the van and see how the van can specifically help them. Because although the van is not just for homebound people or severely disabled people, they're one of our priorities. Because as you know, most of the people who use our senior center today are fully ambulatory, they have their own cars, they drive here and there. So in terms of meeting unmet needs in the community, it's the people who don't use the center but might like to, or might like the van for other purposes in their lives. They're going to be our focus. But until we start contacting those people and telling them what we have available, we won't know how many of them are going to come forward and say, this works for me. And we also know, based on comments that the mayor and others have made, that it's not as if people are totally helpless now. They're getting by imposing on their neighbors, their children, their friends to take them places. And this is supposed to ease that problem in the sense that having this available as a reliable service will take some of the burden off family members and aides, et cetera, et cetera. So all of these ideas are debatable, not carved in stone, but I'm here tonight to recommend these as the starting point, and any questions you have as to the rationale as to why we're doing it this way as opposed to another way, I hopefully can answer that.
Well, I think you're right. I don't think we should be debating this. I think this is an excellent starting point. What I would like to point out is we're talking about connecting this with the senior coordinator, for lack of a better definition of that job. What we really need at this point is a job before Jewel can go out and start the process of hiring somebody, we need a job description. And I think the first action that this council will take in regards to all of this is approving a job description for this senior coordinator. We also are under a little bit of a handicap here in that our staffing situation at the senior center is in a little bit of state of flux because of the illness of our director. So, right now we don't have, we have a deputy director who's acting like a director. And where we're going with that, because the deputy director also, hopefully she's gonna stay, but she's in the process of moving, so we don't know. So in the meantime, I think what we really need is that job description for the senior coordinator, so that
That's actually already been submitted. It hasn't been fine-tuned.
well, that will be finalized at this table. It's the council really that will approve that job description, and then we can go out to start the process of hiring somebody.
Who is it submitted to?
Now, let me
Jewel.
just, as a liaison, let me just say, the senior citizen committee looked at the task on hand and thought that the first thing has to be done was the policy for the bus. Once the policy for the bus is approved, so the purchase can go on, and because it's gonna take months and months, we can now look at the finalizing the actual definition of the liaison administrator and so, which is gonna be done to the next meetings, so we can hire, but wanted to put, basically, to be able to put in motion the purchasing of the van,
Well, first of all,
so it doesn't have to be
the
held by that.
the van will, the process of purchasing the van will start as soon as the budget is approved. Okay, in the meantime, we won't be getting this van till, for months.
Exactly.
I just heard that Mark just said, we'd like to have this senior coordinator by June. So
Yes.
I think,
Probably not
you're,
gonna happen.
well, it's probably not gonna happen,
No,
but
that's right.
what I'm saying is, it sounds like we might have the coordinator before we have the van.
Hopefully we do.
So I think the first thing is
I
the
disagree.
coordinator.
Yes.
Scheduling for a van, depending on your scale, if you're talking trips every day or 5 people pickups every day, is a big lift, scheduling alone.
Okay.
So
We can
keeping
start.
that in mind, senior outreach person on top of scheduling, on top of outreach, or coordinating, is a bigger description than it seems. Scheduling alone is very
So,
possible.
to answer your question, because that's true, the actual Senior Citizen Committee looked at that and they think that that's gonna be pretty much an hour a day for a person that's full-time, the way it is now. If you think it's more, everybody
Keep in mind,
has
the
its own.
senior coordinator is not gonna be full-time.
Yeah,
That's the other.
yeah, but that's, okay, so the way they were looking is asking if that we can look for a grant and see if we can get a grant for that type of a coordinator and for a bus driver. And I think that Gloria has sent that information to you, Jewel, to look for that type of grant. And the grant is, it's basically a grant for older worker recruitment. And she sent the information. If you need more information, she will be very ready, glad to send it to you. If we can get that grant for the coordinator, for the bus coordinator, that would help a lot. And the committee was thinking that that coordinator can then stay at the senior center and help also, especially now that they are so short-handed with other things that can happen if we can get this grant.
Well, I think if you wanna move forward, the process of getting the grant, in my mind, is a lengthy one. You're not gonna apply for a grant tomorrow and get it next week.
No.
I think what we have approved in the budget is a part-time senior coordinator and the purchase of a van. The process of purchasing the van can start
Okay.
after the budget is approved. I think what we ought to do is get that job description so that we can move forward on hiring that senior coordinator. And if we hire the right person, that senior coordinator is gonna come in and put all of your ideas together.
That's right.
And they're gonna know more about this, hopefully, than any of us at this table, so that they can really shape the program. But it all depends on the senior coordinator.
The
The van
committee
isn't gonna
thought-
be here for at least 4 or 5 months.
Committee thought that this is a long process that needs to be started, and this was one of the requirements. If they understood wrong or right,
Understood, what is one of the requirements?
Well,
the bus policy is required.
Well, that's
in order-
fine, but we really don't, that's great to have, but
Yeah.
until we have the van, it's not
They
the
thought
end
that
of
this
the
is a
world. if we don't
requirement.
have
It was
it.
communicated by Jewel to Gloria that in order to know what size and kind of van to buy,
Right.
Needed
she needed to
guidelines.
know more
Okay.
about what it was.
So
gonna
that-
be.
And I think at this point, I think what we need is we need feedback regarding the guidelines, because this is not necessarily the form in which you're going to give your potential customers. They're not gonna get narratives of this nature.
No,
So I
no,
think
no.
the first, 'cause
The
like.
bid is gonna be
yeah.
different. This is the policy. The bid is different.
When you say bid, no, I'm not talking about bid, I'm talking about the policies and procedures as,
For the
that they have to
public.
be in a format
Oh, yeah,
that you can
absolutely.
disseminate.
Mark,
Yeah,
please?
so these processes are always kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and so we're kind of moving forward, I think, in the right direction, I think.
Because now
these-
this can be.
Right, these
yeah.
guidelines are
Mhm.
an excellent starting point, makes a lot of sense, and we do this job description, and we're that much further along.
Agreed.
I have a logistical question for Jewel. If we, just a brainstorm, it's like a dispatcher technically, the person who schedules the rides,
Mm-hmm.
could that be done through county community transport, just the dispatch part? Technically, instead of a phone call?
Technically, it could be, yes. But, I mean, I don't know if we have to put that in place,
That's
and
what I
we
mean,
also have to
I'd
get
have
the
to talk.
county's willingness
Right.
and ability.
Would you
to-
investigate
Yeah.
that? Because
Yeah, 'cause I just
I
thought of
think
it.
you are very correct in saying that just the scheduling alone of this bus
It's a little
service
different,
is going to take a serious amount of time. And if we can put that away from the senior coordinator, it'll give her,
Which
or
gives
him an
the senior
opportunity
coordinator
to do
more-
other things.
Right, exactly.
Well, I think their ability and their willingness to do it is one thing, but I
Right.
think we still need to provide
right.
feedback about,
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
policies.
This is just a brainstorm.
because when we
Absolutely.
talk about, for instance, transporting people to medical appointments within Bergen County only, that may sound like it's limiting it,
No,
but
it's
Bergen County is huge.
Yeah.
And
50
are
minutes
you
is a
going
lot.
to wait for people? That's gonna tie up a lot of time. You're just gonna drop people, and then how are they gonna get back?
Well,
Yeah.
Those are the
think-
logistical things that have to be.
And that's one of the things right away
resolved.
that should be fine-tuned. There's no way that we can service all of Bergen County.
We don't
I
even
think-
want it.
I think the answer should be maybe a 10-mile limit, as long as that hopefully 10 miles would include Hackensack, Fort Lee, Englewood, and Teaneck, which is where majority of our I think our constituencies, doctors will be in that area. You know, once you go beyond Hackensack, you're talking about a trip of at least a half hour just to get there.
Yeah.
And, you know, the bus is gonna be in operation.
And that's
all
the
day
kind of
long.
feedback, because that helps to shape it
We had
and refine it.
we had a 10-mile limit over there. And basically, what we were thinking over there was that the bus was never gonna wait for somebody.
And someone who's
We're gonna
part-time.
have a tour where we're gonna dispatch all the people, then it's gonna come back to pick them up 2, 3, 4 hours or so, because it will be not feasible to wait for everybody appointment. So those are gonna be, and that's where the dispatch will have to make sure that it coordinates the round trip of the bus.
Which is an all-day thing, that's the problem.
No, but once you can, no, see, the policy says you have to make appointments 48 hours in advance. Once you make those 48 hours in advance, then basically you can create the route and give it to the driver in the
Well, first of
morning.
all, keep in mind, Max, that somebody makes a doctor's appointment,
Yeah.
more often than not, they make it a week or two in advance.
Which is
So,
better.
which is
Sometimes
even
even
better.
Even better.
It gives the dispatcher a starting point.
Exactly.
And, you know, if you call up, well, we can't take you at 9 because we're taking somebody else at 8:30, but we could take you at.
Exactly.
So, you know, you gotta be hopeful that the average medical appointment isn't made 48 hours in
No,
advance.
minimum, that's gonna be
No,
minimum.
I'm saying.
So in order not to
I
have
understand,
emergencies
but
for tomorrow.
And you talk about if you want to, if you want to deal with emergencies, well, you know, it's
This
going to
is
be
not
hard
it.
to do if you've
This
got
is not
4
it.
doctor's appointments on a day and somebody calls up and says, I really got to get to the hospital tomorrow. It may be a little difficult.
That's not the type of things those are for scheduled appointments, the way it is right now.
Okay. Mark, did you get any valuable feedback here?
Well, I'm just concerned that this, we move ahead in some way. So if this has been accepted in principle as a policy you can work with, that's fine, but when does the purchase of the bus actually take place?
Well,
So two things, do you need anything else to start the purchasing? And then what is the timeframe?
We still don't have a public policy. We've discussed some of the issues, but what we need is we need a comment period for the mayor and council to review the guidelines. I can compile those comments, get them back to the committee, and it's a matter of comments, recommendations. We just
When-
talked about
when-
several
when does your
things.
committee meet
But that
next?
didn't change
When does
anything
your
that's
committee
in
meet
writing
next?
here.
Another 10 days or so.
Jewel, do you think within 10 days you could put together, taking their suggestions, a proposed policy for them to review at their next meeting, and then once that's reviewed, we can bring it to the mayor and council and finalize it?
Do you know the date? Because I'm gonna be on vacation.
It's the second Monday of,
Well, are you meeting with next week or the week after? Or is Gloria away then?
Gloria's away, but he's gonna be
Yeah,
chairing.
it's the second Monday
The
of.
ninth, next Monday.
Can you do
Yeah, he's
that?
gonna be
Ready
chairing.
I'll be
to,
gone.
pretty soon.
I won't be here.
Well, Jewel will be away. She's on vacation
Yeah.
from the middle of this. When do you leave? Next week?
Next
You're gonna be away from, so,
But I'm confused about the public comment idea. I've
Not
never seen
public
this
comment,
before.
internal,
Internal.
internal.
Or let the council.
Council
I
comment.
would
Yeah.
like to, her to put together a proposed policy that you folks at the committee can review, make comments on, then it goes here and we finalize it. And the 9th is not practical. Would it make sense to maybe move that meeting 2 more weeks? Instead of the 9th, the
That's fine.
23rd perhaps?
It's fine.
That would be good. Yeah.
Since you'll chair it, since Gloria's not gonna be here,
Will
you'll
she,
chair it.
will she be
Well,
here
she'll
on the 20th?
probably be back in 2 weeks.
Exactly.
I think.
I would ask move the committee to the 23rd and we'll have something for you then.
Yep.
Okay?
So I can sit down with Jewel in the meantime, and if she has questions about why we recommended what we did, we can discuss that.
Yeah, well, she'll put something together. If she has questions, she'll call you. Otherwise, it'll come out to you first.
Okay. And I just want to clarify what Max said about this county program. It's called Bergen County Workforce, and it exists to help people get employment, of course, in Bergen County, but there's an older workers section in there which allows municipalities to interview these people if they like their qualifications and hire them, and Bergen County will pick up
The cost.
the cost. So it's not a grant in
Wait,
the
say that,
sense.
go back again, say that part again. If
It's
we-
called Bergen County
If
Workforce.
we hire someone,
Yeah,
Uh-huh,
county
from-
picks up the pay.
That's my understanding.
That's what
I'll get
Gloria
you the
was
Dan,
guidelines
would you
if
look
you'd
into
like.
that, please?
yeah, because that's what they were trying to do to save the
Because it's not really
community
a
money.
grant, it's a program that exists. These
Understood.
people exist.
Okay.
No, understood.
Listen, that sounds
But-
sounds wonderful.
Exactly.
But they listed, I think they listed about 12 professions or jobs, and
Descriptions.
bus driver wasn't one of the ones listed.
Well, it sounds, let's put it this way, it sounds too good to be true.
Yeah.
All right,
But we'll take a look at it.
We'll take a look.
Yeah,
okay.
because anytime that you have, where you have like requirements like having a CDL license and hopefully even possibly some experience.
Right. All right, Dan, you'll let us know?
Okay. And I don't want there to be any confusion about the dispatcher scheduler person. We may disagree about how much time it will take a person to schedule the 20 or 30 riders we're gonna have every day. Towns like River Edge have said it takes an hour. Maybe in Teaneck or other places it takes 2 hours. I don't know. The point is that it's not a full-time job for anybody. And in fact, the putting together of the schedule for the driver is a simple mechanical task that takes place every day. The problem is, since people might be calling all day long to book rides, there has to be someone willing to answer the phone and get back to them about whether they get the ride or not.
Oh, this is a work in progress,
Right, and to your point about using the county, if we do that the way some police departments share dispatchers or 911, that's possible, but again, you have to take into consideration the public relations aspect, because people expect to be treated in a certain way, and hopefully the county person will be just as friendly and nice as a locally hired person.
Dan is
will
gonna
be.
answer the phone.
But it says, some of the towns we talked to, when we were over in Teaneck, for example, they had a very kindly old lady who's been there forever, and she just knows the right way to talk to everybody, and she does it as a benefit to the community. I mean, she's paid, but she's not paid market rate. And anyhow, those are decisions which you can make as you go along. But the idea was that the dispatcher would be already on the staff of the senior center. When you hire a new deputy, that's part of their responsibility. Because otherwise you have to find someone else in the borough administration to do it. Okay?
Well, this,
Thank you.
even after we have the van, it's gonna be a work in progress. We're gonna have to figure out how it's done. And unfortunately, the staff that we have right now, there probably isn't anybody that's got an extra hour or two a day to do this. So we gotta figure out how it's gonna be done. Maybe it's a volunteer that'll do it. You never know. There's lots of possibilities, but we're determined to move this forward and get it done. Tony?
Yeah, because it's been in the newspaper at least 3 times, so there's a lot of expectation out there.
I have expectations as well, Mark. I think it's
Okay.
gonna be a great thing. Tony?
Thank you.
Just want to go on the record and say I am dead against any voluntary donation,
Not 30,
100%.
Voluntary donation.
whatever.
$2 per trip.
Oh,
On paper.
One of the richest towns in Bergen County. I think we can afford not to charge or do voluntary or involuntary.
okay. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate all the work that goes into this. Next is a telephone upgrade contract award. Jewel?
Yes, just wanted to give you an update, and I think I referenced it in my update memo, that we wanted to delay the actual contract award until the meeting of March 24th. The board has done the same.
May 24th.
May 24th, what did I say, March? May 24th, to give the attorneys the opportunity to review the shared services agreement that the board attorney is preparing. Bill, I think you'll have that by Thursday, and that'll give us more than enough time. I mean, I'm not overly concerned about it. This will be like the 3rd or 4th major project and shared service agreement that we've done in conjunction with the board. But we always make sure that both entities are in agreement
Usually
with
fair,
the content,
yeah.
yes.
Good agreements.
So that was, just to let you know that we're looking at a slightly different timing. And as I said, the board also decided to wait so that we had both documents, so that both will be on the same agendas. The board will also be meeting on the 24th as well, which is also not uncommon, that we're meeting on the same dates. Councilman Bash had, I guess, kind of reiterated some of the questions that he had asked of the board representatives that were here. And Max, even though it's 3 questions, but it's essentially the same reply. You asked whether or not the borough systems would be up and running if the board system went down. And the answer from TM Technology Partners is that yes, the voice system will allow the administration complex, DPW, and the senior center to each operate independently if network communications are compromised between the facilities.
At
Okay.
one time, they were talking about putting what they call an appliance, which is a telephone switch, additionally in here, because without that one, any connection, we lose the connection between the Board of Ed and the municipal building. We're gonna lose the telephone switch routing capability.
But the capability that's desired is already established. I mean, it's the work of putting in the appropriate switches. That's what the contract is for the installation of the system. It's already been designed.
We were here last time,
Yes.
and the contractor over there said that with the addition of a $2,000, what they call appliance switch, in the building here, that independent work will be able to be achieved.
But you asked the question, can it be done? And they're saying yes.
Yeah,
That
and I
was the
would like
same
to see that,
question.
it's basically, I would like to see how that is gonna be implemented.
Okay. Any other questions? Building department request for sign amendment ordinance. Bill, did you review this? Is there anything that you feel we need to do?
There are some, as a result of this, I went back and read the Reed case here. Again, we're not close to, the situation in that case. And the concern that many municipalities had was just the verbiage of the opinion, because it could be read to cause problems for many common distinctions in sign ordinances. We do have a few.
So are there a few that need to be?
There are a few that I would say that, based upon that decision, the Gilbert decision, I would change just to be safe. As a practical matter, I think the likelihood of those issues ever coming up to bite us is really remote.
I agree, but
But there are some things, and I think I said a while ago that in reading that decision, because I read the decision when it first came out, that I thought a couple of our ordinance provisions could be argued to be contrary to the decision. So I should change those.
so will you move forward with the proposed changes? Review them with Bob Burns, who sent this, this
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I think this is more of a,
He just wants to feel confident,
a cry wolf
So
thing, but because again, as I said, although I'm being hyper technical about some of the provisions, the likelihood of us really having a problem with some of the things I think we should change
So-
is remote.
So we
but-
understand we're not in serious jeopardy
Yeah.
here, but when can we anticipate the changes?
So, again, going through a lot of little changes. I will start working on them, but I'm not, unless you really want to make it a very high priority.
No, but I'm just, if you told me that it'd be 2 or 3 months, then in 3
Yeah,
months, we'd remind you.
I'll go through and maybe in stages. There are a couple things that are more important than others.
Okay.
I think I'll do it in stages and
So you'll
and start right.
prioritize it.
Yeah, I'll start it. I think between now and the end of the summer, I'll make the changes, but not all at once, because it's that ordinance, as you recall, is very detailed.
Right.
And there are a lot of little things in there that probably should be changed, and maybe only a couple of them are in any way.
Would any of them affect political signs? Because I think one of his concerns is we want to be ahead of the political season.
Political signs are one of the things that that.
And we don't want there to be any confusion.
Why don't you look at that
I
area
would make that
first,
a
although
priority.
I frankly think that our ordinances are pretty good.
Pretty good.
Maybe
Yeah.
not 100%, but if you could get closer to 100%, that would be great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Our ordinance is pretty good. And I was hoping that, after the Gilbert decision, we'd see some model provisions at the league.
No.
And it's funny that we didn't, because you would have thought that we
Yeah.
would have.
Okay, thank you.
Right, we just, yeah.
Next is the FEMA
Sure.
request for fund reimbursement. Is that you or Joel
Yeah,
or
that's
Tony?
me.
Okay.
But I just want to comment, I think I gave you everything that you need, a very detailed overview of what is happening. I didn't want it to be thought that this was something that was, an extremely severe penalty or anything of that nature that FEMA is requesting of us. As you can see, we're talking about reimbursements that we received going back to as far back as 2010 and 2011. So the funds have long been in our coffers. Quite a bit of it has actually been expended over that 5-year period, since this is money that we use for our storm trust. Just so people understand, FEMA is the federal agency. They work through the New Jersey State Police, which has the state agency. The state agency has been a work in progress in terms of putting everything into the computerized database that they have. And as you know, I think because of the high volume and high number of disasters that we've been faced with, it's taken FEMA a little time to do all of the accounting. Well, finally, they're down to the point where they can tell us to the penny.
So
What
basically,
they would
they
like
gave
to
us
have
more
back.
money than they feel we deserve. They're asking for it back.
That the documentation could actually
And
justify.
they're asking
yes.
for it back, and we have not spent that money, so we do have it in our coffers to return without creating a burden in any way,
Correct.
shape, or
We've expended from that pot,
Right,
but
but we
the
have
pot
enough
is
left to
still,
cover it.
yes.
Say no?
Tony, do you have anything to add to this?
So I'd like to give Susan, our CFO, the authorization to go ahead and make those reimbursements.
Next item on our agenda is the ordinance to repeal the business improvement district. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Unless somebody has a thought or a comment or a suggestion, we'll move forward with that. And the last item to be considered is the open space renewal referendum for the general election ballot. Okay, so that everybody understands where we are in this?
I put this on just as for housekeeping, because August 19th is the deadline to submit any
Right.
municipal referendum questions to the county. Now, after this month, we don't have a regular meeting schedule with, the primary election in June, then it's back-to-back meetings for the rest of June.
Right.
And then we meet only on July 11th, and then August 15th. So we push it and push it and push it, then worst case scenario will be 4 days away from submitting the question for the ballot.
Are there two members of the council that would like to join me on a committee that will meet at least once or twice in the next 2 weeks to try and put together a recommendation? Well, first of all, I mean, in order to craft a statement for the referendum, I think we really need at this point, and I'm going to echo some of the things that Mark Feldman said, we need a, lack of a better term, a policy. Now, we've been talking about this for as long as we've had open space money, which is over 10 years. We've never really come up with it. Now, the title of our open space trust fund is a guideline. It basically says open space, recreation, and historic. And then in the what do you call that was on the ballot?
Preamble of the
Interpretive
interpretive statement.
Interpretive statement basically went a little deeper, and in fact, the interpretations of that allowed our borough attorney to justify and approve the expenditure of the money for Geisinger Field.
Well, including what the statute says.
Right, but so if we want to go in a different direction, or we want to keep it in a similar direction, we can do either of those. So if there's two council, yes.
And I just want to just put it in everybody's mind, the way the ballot is in English, Spanish, and Korean. You have from the president all the way down to council, and then in the middle you'll have state questions such as the casino, possibly the pension reform, and then county questions. So you don't want to be too verbose and have it lost because space is
Well,
very limited.
I would recommend that maybe you sit in on this committee. We're only going to meet once or twice.
Yeah.
And I think your assistance would be extremely valuable.
I'm volunteering.
Thank you, Max. Would
Just
anybody
because
else
I'll
care
be
to?
there.
Dan? All right, I will put out a couple of proposed dates, and hopefully the
Yeah.
two of you, we can arrange for at least the first meeting. We'll take it from there.
What I'll do is I'll reach out to the county and see, there's no word limit for what, if there are any recommendations.
Well, before we get to the interpretive statement, we need to, this committee is going to work on a, for lack of a better term, a policy, or guidelines is probably a better word, for the expenditure of these funds. Mark, please.
Just one comment about the open space fund. You know, one of the challenges that the different committees have had over the past few years in coming to terms with or agreeing on what to do with the money has frankly been that we really are not collecting enough money to do something of value with that money in this town. Because as we know, $1 million in this town doesn't buy a whole lot of land. And whether it was 53 Knickerbocker or any other location, if we want to be able to sit here in 5 years from now, have enough money to do something of substance, we need to collect historically more than we were collecting every year in order to have that.
Half penny?
What were we doing, 1 cent?
Are we at
We
full
could get up to, or half a
Well,
cent.
whatever the number is,
Half a cent?
yeah,
I forget
whatever the
what it
number
is.
is, that should be, when the committee meets, that should be part of the conversation,
Well,
is
and
how
let-
much to be collected to do
Lisette,
something
maybe you
of
can give
value.
us
So-
an idea what other towns are
Well,
are.
The county, I believe, had a range. We didn't have a range, we just had a flat
Well,
There's
Now-
also
amount.
a benefit of going past the half cent. You qualify for more matching grants of some sort. So I don't know what we're at now.
Well, and you have to balance all of this with the consideration that the more you ask for,
The less chance.
the less chance of it being, I
Sure.
don't know what kind of response we're going to get from the public, from the voters, as to whether they want to continue this. I mean, most of us, I think, understand the importance of this trust fund. But when you're creating a tax, and this is what this is, it's an additional tax, you have to really sell it to the public. That was done 10 years ago. Now, in addition to how we describe the interpretive statement, they also can look at how it worked out the last 10 years. So, you know, we're gonna talk about something else
Well, that's
later
one of
on.
the issues. One of the things people can look at is, okay, after 10 years, we still have, you know, $2 million sitting in the bank
Yeah.
because we couldn't figure out what to do with the money.
Well,
Or we couldn't figure out what we can do with the small amount of money we have to do with.
well, whether we had 1.7 million or 3 million in there, part of the consideration in not spending it was to accumulate it, like you say, so that, you know,
You can do something
if we had accumulated enough money, we might have considered 53 Knickerbocker, you know, but who knows? That was a very complex situation, and the committee will work it
Yeah.
out and
Those are
come
just
up
my
with a
thoughts.
recommendation. That's the first step to an interpretive statement.
And what we also need is the amount of money that will be raised by the time the referendum comes, so we know.
We have that, I can give, that's
Yeah,
one,
the
we have
several
1.7
but-
right now.
But by the time the referendum comes, we'll need to know exactly how much more, so we know what we're asking for.
Okay, next is the update memo.
Oh,
Updates.
fairly short this week. We talked about the telephone contract award.
Just to verify the telephone, we're gonna get the existing actual draft that shows over there does not show how this can work independently. They said they're gonna put additional appliances. We wanna make sure that we
We
get that
just
information.
covered that.
We just-
We
yeah.
just
Okay.
made that point.
When you keep saying you wanna see it,
I
what you
wanna see the new changes that they make to ensure that this is gonna be
Whether
working
they made
independently.
any changes,
Right.
they just, I guess if they can, they're gonna try and satisfy
this
That's what
request.
we need
your
to do.
questions.
That's
But
it.
But they've already said that they'll do it.
Okay, you know what Reagan says?
But you keep saying you wanna see it.
Exactly, we basically trust and verify. That's what Reagan said.
You wanna see the schematic?
I think I wanna see the thought process. What are they gonna do?
Okay.
And that's what.
DPW building contractor?
Yes. I think we're happy to report that the contracting firm of LMN Contracting was able to cure the issue of their unpaid performance bond. They did pay it. We did get a copy of the
Receipt.
receipt. Bill has had direct contact with the president, I believe,
Yeah,
of the bond
president
company.
and one vice president.
Okay.
Okay. HPC Plex?
HPC plaques. I tried to give you a fairly detailed rundown on what the HPC is proposing. I think main thing we're hanging our hat on is that Bob Burns did ask the borough attorney to review the proposal.
Our ordinance with respect
I think you saw
to,
what the back looks like.
Sign ordinance.
yeah,
Okay.
and it's provided for
Okay.
rather specifically in our side ordinance.
So basically, I would let the HPC know that it has gone
Right.
through review and that
Not a
they're
problem.
cleared.
Updates?
Okay. Updates, we have actually, we usually report back to you about how we're faring in terms of receiving donations for the fireworks and summer concerts. As of April 25th, we had $11,500. We've actually gained about $2,000 since then. So I think that we're on a pretty good track to either meet or exceed the usual $20,000 amount, which covers everything.
Well,
Those are very good fireworks. Really
very good
Yeah,
concerts
they're
too.
very
You
nice.
gotta come back.
Yeah.
Thank you, Drew.
Sure.
Anything else?
Nope, that's it.
Under correspondence, folks, we have two notes. One is from the usual, the film company that's working up on Park Street, and
Lizette's friends.
there was a change in this. The note was originally 5:18 from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. It's been changed to 5:11, which is within the week, I guess. They're looking to do some one evening, couple hours of outdoor shots of the house, so they can, once they do it once, they don't have to do it again. Once again, the neighbors have not had any issues with it. That's my main concern, that it doesn't negatively impact the quality of life of any neighbors, and it has not. They're
When a-
very unobtrusive.
When a film company comes in and asks for this, do they have to notify the neighbors that they're gonna be out late?
Yeah.
Okay.
The other request was for a pod extension. How many extensions have we given this fellow?
No, he was approved once, this is a first extension, it's just, he didn't request
never
the
requested it.
extension, a lot of time lapsed, several
Oh.
months lapsed, and,
So unless somebody has an objection, why don't we tell them this is a final extension?
How much is you're asking here, 30 days, 90 days?
I think it's in June.
Says unlimited?
To June 9th.
June 9th, that's
Yeah,
fine.
okay.
Yeah, I pass the pod every day, and the property is well maintained, and
Across the tracks.
since they took that ugly sign down, the juice is enough. Okay, does anybody have any questions on the resolutions?
Hmm?
No.
Yeah, the other side of that road.
Under old business,
That's the whole,
okay,
that's what I thought.
Peter Linus Court. We met with the property owner. And, before we even get started on this, some comments were made during public comment. We live in a very small town. And the applicant for the owner of 19 Peter Linus Court, everybody should know that he was the chair of the Historic Preservation Commission for over 10 years. It's a fact. And, if we were going to look into every little thing, you'd probably have to recuse the entire commission, because they all worked with this gentleman for 10 years, maybe longer. He's probably on the commission before he was chair. Nevertheless, the process must go forward. And I think I speak for everybody in saying that from time to time, people that come before us where we have to make decisions are acquaintances or friends of ours. Technically, if somebody has an application before the planning board, if you live within, I think it's 200 feet, you have to recuse yourself. I know when the JCC had an application, members of the JCC had to recuse themselves. Where that starts and where that ends is open to discussion. And that's why the planning board has an attorney, the mayor and council has an attorney, and those attorneys should be the final word on whether people need to recuse themselves. In the case of the Historic Preservation Commission, they make recommendations to the mayor and council. So nothing that they do is etched in stone or irreversible. That person, that's the way I feel about it. I mean, Don Marino is connected to the Historic Preservation Commission, but I will tell you this. My sense of the Historic Preservation Commission is they're not going to do favors really for anybody. They have a very high standard, and to my perspective, I sometimes agree with them, I sometimes disagree with them, but they're all volunteers like we are. So, if people feel strongly about it, we can ask our borough attorney, or we can ask the planning board attorney as to whether or not people need to be recused in a situation like this.
Well, the key word, Mayor, you used was need, because there are two levels of recusal. One, where you need to recuse yourself because there's a conflict, and we know what that entails. I won't go through what constitutes a conflict, but there's another level of recusal where you technically don't have a conflict, but you feel that the circumstances, whether it's a relationship between you and the person or some other reason, will interfere with your ability to be fair and impartial, and to discharge the duties of your office in terms of making a decision. That's really a personal decision, and it's not for the attorney to say, well, you need to recuse yourself. It's something that the person has to say, I can't be fair in making the determination here, even though I don't have a conflict. But we all know a lot of times conflicts are difficult to say whether it's a conflict or not. But we all know when something really is a conflict. If you live within you know,
Bill.
the zone.
What I'd like you to do is shoot me an email with those thoughts on it. Since I have the responsibility of appointing the members of the HPC, and I feel a very strong responsibility for all the committees and commissions, the members of whom I've appointed. I will pass that email on with a cover note to the chair of the Historic Preservation Commission, asking that each person on that committee analyze whether or not they think they can fairly make a decision, because as far as I know, although they've talked about designating this house as historic, no such recommendation has been made as of yet. So that's part of the scenario I was going to discuss. Yes, Max?
I think that the issue that Mark has brought up is not with the historical committee. Mark has brought up the issue with the planning board. The issue for him is to make sure that the planning board does not do any favors in deciding to split the property, giving a $600,000 SSL benefit to the owner because people on the planning board like it, not in the historical committee. That's where.
Well,
See, that's a,
That's where the-
first of all, in an effort to prevent or minimize misinformation from being spread, I don't know where you come up with numbers of benefits. The odds are, knowing what I know about land values and how things work in real estate in Tenafly, that if it was pure dollars and cents, the applicant would be best served by just selling off the property, not for historic purposes, not for open space purposes, but to a developer. And I think as I was going to describe this process, I personally feel that the applicant may be making a sacrifice if he was to agree to sell a piece of that property to the borough using open space funds, because the borough is limited when purchasing property to pay no more than the assessed value, or the appraised value of the property. And in the discussions with the applicant, it was pointed out to him that that is the case. And I don't believe that that would be a deal breaker for him, because he would like to see this property preserved as is. And one of the reasons I'm putting this on the table tonight is when I went up there to look at it really for the first time, I felt that the property was worth saving. Now, that's just an opinion. There's no right or wrong. You may agree or you may disagree. One of the things I wanted to point out tonight was one of the purposes of the Open Space Fund is to preserve open space, to purchase open space, not necessarily for a park, not necessarily to build something on it, but to preserve it rather than allow it to be developed. This body, a number of years ago, chose to do that with an acre on top of the hill, on the other side of the nature center, where if we did not purchase that property, it would have been sold to a developer who would have put up a 1 acre home there, adjacent to the nature center. And what we did by purchasing that property is preserve an acre, you want to call it forest or meadow, as a buffer zone between the only house that's there and the nature center. We preserve that. The number of people that will actually get enjoyment out of that is minimal because of its location. So when Councilman Bash says, well, this property on Linus Court is going to benefit a minimal amount of people, he's correct. But that's not always the purpose of the Open Space Fund. The Open Space Fund can be used, and in many cases is used, just to prevent development. When I took a look at this property, I said, this property, it would be a shame to allow this property to be developed. And the proposal as it has evolved now is to move the subdivision line over a little bit to the south to allow the garage building to be on the same side of the line as the barn. This way, that the barn, which is a house actually, would have a garage. If that barn remained on the left side of the line, the original application was to demolish that garage, you would have a house on the right side without a garage, which is illegal in Tenafly. And they would have to build a garage in front of that house, or the cars would be parked in the front of the house, which is, something the neighbors probably wouldn't like. So the application has evolved to where if we went forward with the purchase, the garage would remain, the property that we'd be purchasing would be slightly smaller. And my vision is to leave the property exactly the way it is, which is, in my mind, a treasure. Now, like I said, there's no right or wrong to this. If the decision is not to buy it, then that property will most likely be developed. Whether the subdivision goes through or not, and the planning board has not, has not decided that, or it doesn't. If the property is subdivided according to the application, then a house will most likely be built on that space. If the property is not subdivided, the application is denied, there's a good chance that the property will be sold as is, and the barn would be knocked down unless it's designated, which it hasn't happened yet, and then you'll have a big house on an oversized property there. So those are the alternatives. I'm suggesting to the body, to this body, merely that we consider moving this forward, which would require getting an appraisal of the property that we would consider buying. Then the applicant would have to agree to that price. And he might say, you know what, forget it, it's not enough. Because I frankly don't know if he has a true understanding of what that property will be appraised for. But if we decide not to do it, then the property is just kind of lost forever, whether the application for the subdivision is approved or not. And I think it would be, worth our while to just move the process along a bit and see where it goes. We're not committing ourselves to anything other than an appraisal. Mark, please.
So just thinking back over the past few years on the historic properties, and we've struggled to reach compromises on different properties. We couldn't, and by we, I mean this body here, plus the owners and the historic committee, we couldn't reach a compromise on 53 Knickerbocker because of the economics. We couldn't reach a compromise on 87 County Road because of the economics and the way the building was laid out. And maybe perhaps there's a way to reach a compromise here where the owner gets some economic value and we get to preserve a historic house, if that's the way it goes. And again, maybe perhaps we can reach a compromise with this.
Dan?
The environmental committee is actually quiet. They want to think about it. So they don't know the cost yet, and they showed a little interest as of April 11th or something.
Is the environmental committee?
And I don't know, depending on the value, I would say. I mean, you have to look how it's cut up. The land is divided up, and
Well, exactly. Eventually, something would come back to this body showing you the exact
right.
proposed subdivision, and the proposed price. That wouldn't come back to this body unless the applicant has already agreed to do it. And at the same time, the HPC has agreed to designate the barn as historic. So if those things don't fall into place, then there's nothing to discuss. Tony, please.
Listen, I'm all for preserving historic houses, but I think we're putting the, no pun intended, the cart before the horse here, because let's say we do buy the property. Have we given any thought as to who's going to maintain it? How are we going to maintain it? Who's going to pay for the cost of maintaining it? I mean, there's a lot of things that we have to look at. I mean, it's nice to say we're going to spend
Well,
X amount of dollars, but
that's
we
part
got to
of
look 10 years down or next year. I mean,
That's part of the equation. We need to hear from the DPW as to what the cost of, now, keep in mind, we're not buying the house. We're not buying the entire property. We'd be buying a little more than half of the property, which means, you have to mow the lawn and you have to maintain the landscaping. So but that is a very valid point and part of the equation. Paul, and then Max?
I think at our last meeting, the HPC did suggest to move forward with designation. They said, but again, it was pending on the review of the planning board. They would say that they would suggest designation on whatever parcel remains with the barn, be it subdivided or not, if the planning board had decided to go ahead on it. As far as owning property up there, I have to agree with Tony that, you know, it's not really in a context that it would enhance a nature center or another contiguous park, so it would require additional funding. But again, originally, the application was for a 2/3 to 1/3 roughly subdivision, and now we're talking 50-50, so the numbers could be different. So we're not exactly sure what we're looking at.
And keep in mind, you need only go to the next block, North Bray Court, where there's two parallel roads. In between is an island that we theoretically maintain. So this is, you know, we are up there, and there are certain areas throughout the town, little things like the triangle on Knoll Road. There's various places, Esmond Place, that we do maintain. So this would just be added to that, and we need to get a cost estimate on that as well. Max, please.
Okay, so from the beginning, I looked over there, and basically, I could not find a value for the town in having a pocket place over there that's not gonna be serving the majority. We had a big problem with money because we spent pieces in there and could never get to the point where we wanna buy a property that's gonna be of value for the town. If we're looking to get something for the senior center, if we taking another 600,000, we wanna renew specifically this tax on the town, so we can get some bulk, so we can get something for the town now. This will be just another piece that is gonna get away from us, and we're not gonna be able to really do what we can do, what we need to do, basically get a lot of property and buy. So, for that reason, and exactly, it's not right or wrong. Another thing is, if they wanna declare the barn historical, declare it. Has nothing to do with the division or not. I'm sorry, or not. You want to do a subdivision and declare the declare the barn historic. Simply declare it. It's not a question for unless the town buys the property, they will declare the barn historic. They basically we are faced with a subdivision in front of the planning board. If the planning board approves it, then the owner is gonna sell that property either to a developer or to the town, and with the money that he's gonna get, he's gonna keep that historic barn. So that is not an issue that depends on us buying the property. They want it basically, if the subdivision is approved, he's gonna use the money to basically keep that property historic. So it's a little bit disingenuous to say that unless we buy the property, we're not gonna have that historical part. The only question is, if the planning board approves, then that property becomes historical because he's gonna have the money to preserve that one. So it's not a question of we have to buy it. And then go back to my previous, we need to bulk up this fund that we have so we can do something for the town. Otherwise, we're just gonna
You mentioned
spend.
the problem. What was the problem?
I didn't say any problem.
You said that there was a problem, we didn't have money or something?
Yeah, we could not buy the 53 Knickerbockers because we didn't have money. If we're gonna get another piece out of it, if there is another property.
So you were recommending we spend $7 million and buy 53 Knickerbocker? If we had it?
If we had it, absolutely. Might as well use it for something that's good. Absolutely.
Dan?
I would say, with the environmental committee, as well as I believe that it might be a good use of the money to stop a second house from going on that block.
Everybody's trouble. I'm not saying
That's, I think,
everybody's
that's,
good.
I don't know.
One of the concerns I have is, you know, we created a business improvement district and created with it a tax, collected all this money and didn't spend it. I think one of the things people will want to know is, why are you going to looking to create another open space trust fund if you're not spending the money on things? Now, I don't, once again, any arguments for or against the purchase of this, any part of this property are valid, I'm sure. But nevertheless, I do believe that if we're going to advocate for an open space fund, that we consider buying open space. So, right now, I would like to get a sense, yes, Tony?
You know, I just want to just comment on Dan's, you know, we talk about what we want to prevent them from putting a house on that, the barn is historic and all. I mean, you know, we have to be very careful. Has anybody ever driven down Jefferson Avenue and Jefferson Newcomb and see that disaster that the planning board allowed to be built next to Doctor's house, which is an historic building? So, I mean, you know, who are we kidding ourselves here? I mean, let's you know, before we start saying we want to prevent houses from going on properties, you know, look at what we've already approved and.
Yeah, we have
I
no
mean,
problem
come
with agreeing with what the planning board is doing.
Well,
I do.
actually,
I'm sorry.
the Historic Preservation Commission, I believe, approved that recommended that
Yeah,
subdivision.
that's great, that's great. That looks great.
I understand
It looks
what you're saying.
wonderful, Tenafly.
And, you know, also the owner of the property, so. Anyway, all I'm asking is to get a sense of whether or not we would be wasting our time if we were to suggest that maybe we get an appraisal on this property.
We have to know how much that half cost.
What is the appraisal cost to do?
For that property,
1,500.
yeah, I think $1,500. Yeah, between $1,000 and $1,500, I think.
I mean, I guess regardless of what ultimate decision this body decides to make, it would be nice to know the amount of money we're talking about,
Exactly.
if that goes towards our decision. If people are philosophically for or against it without even spending the money, then that's what you decide.
Well, also.
But it'd be nice to know what it was worth.
Be nice to know if once the figure is established, whether the owner would be willing to sell it for them.
That's the big thing.
Because like I said, I'm not convinced that he has a realistic sense of what the property will be worth.
Yeah, yeah.
There are two steps. First, you have to get the approval of the subdivision
Of course, no.
before you can even consider.
Well, no,
Well,
we're not,
it would be assuming.
the subdivision has been tabled to get a sense of whether or not, this process will go forward.
They tabled the subject to know if we want to buy it.
Well,
I mean, that has nothing to do with the rules of the subdivision.
what rules are you referring to?
I'm talking about, you know, if you have any type of variances you have to provide, if you have.
Well, that would only be part of the equation.
But
And nobody's suggesting that if we decide to buy the property, that's a reason for the subdivision.
then how would they, if they basically waiting for a decision from us, then they will take
They're
into
not-
consideration.
But so just to kind of back up for a second, and all 98% of the stuff you said before, I
correct.
understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
I understand your arguments. I think if the biggest aspect going on here is the fact that this is a historic house.
Yeah.
If there was not a historic house on the property, I personally don't believe that this would be in front of the planning
Even-
board at any
absolutely.
level, okay? So, whatever the motivations might be, economic or otherwise, the effort, the reason this is in front of the planning board is because of the historic house. And so we're all kind of, the planning board and now
No,
us.
that's
not
incorrect.
true.
The reason it's before the planning board is he wants to subdivide the property,
Right,
and he only wants to keep
understood,
a
but.
small piece of it. He wants to sell the other half.
Right, but I'm just laying out my own opinion that.
Well, that
the
might be the way
house-
the planning board looks at it.
Right, exactly, that the historic house is the motivator behind all this, which is why we're kind of going back and forth a little bit.
Yeah, but
That's
that
why.
has nothing to do with us purchasing.
Except to the extent that the owner has said, let's postpone, he postponed the meeting to get a sense from whether this body would be interested in doing something with the property there with our open space money. So if this body's not interested, he'll go back about his business in front of the planning board. If this body is interested, okay, then it may get to the issue of how it gets subdivided based on what our expectations of the property are. That's all.
But, okay.
Just let
Right.
it take the time.
Then just make me smart for a second, Paul. If the committee declares that an historic house,
Mhm.
does that have any bearing on what they can and can't do with the property?
Depends on the order they do it. If they declare it historic first, property in
Well, no, it
its entirety.
depends what they designate historic. If they designate just the
Correct.
house, that's one thing. If they designate the whole property, that's nothing.
I don't think there have been any cases where they've only designated a house and not its
Well,
property.
I believe that's what
No,
they've
that's
considered
what-
doing here.
And that's what happened with 53 Knickerbocker.
Just the house.
No,
what
that's,
they proposed.
they wanted to
Well,
have
they
the
voted on
property.
both, but right.
We wanted to
Well,
declare the house.
Correct.
Tony brought up the doctor's property. It was the
That-
house,
that
the
was
house
a-
was declared historic.
No, the whole property was. He
Was it?
needed, he
And then-
needed to
then the-
go through a certificate of appropriateness.
Oh, he did, and he
Yes.
got it from the HBC.
Correct.
So it's conceivable then that by declaring the house and the property, that
Well,
The
first of all,
HBC
Tony, keep in mind that the HBC recommends it's this body that declares.
Right. And the HBC recommends making a house historic also to the planning board. So the planning board gets to deal out the
But the
cards.
planning board doesn't have anything to do with the designation.
They
All the
will
planning
make a
board is going to
recommendation.
consider is the impact of the subdivision. And if the subdivision is granted under the premise that the house is designated and the other half is purchased by the borough, that's the way the subdivision is approved. Okay, if it's, and if the borough is not purchasing it and saving that property, the planning board has the ability to look at the subdivision differently.
Well, the applicant would present the subdivision differently.
Right,
And
exactly.
obviously, the planning board can look at it.
Yeah, but it's not the planning board that shapes the application, it's
Right,
the
it's the
applicant.
applicant.
You know, and
I hope
the
so.
planning board might look at it differently if they're looking at a house versus saving the property.
Is that part of the criteria?
It doesn't matter, the
It's-
applicant has,
I'm looking over here, they
What
told us.
criteria for what?
Let me, they
Doesn't
told us
matter.
that they could not stop the division of 53 Knickerbocker.
right.
No-
Because the
no
law
va-
is so, is.
No
let me
variance is
finish.
required.
The variance was
There's a
required.
Because there
variance
was no
required
variance,
here.
and that's what it is, and, it doesn't matter if we wanna declare it historic or not, we're gonna get just legal issues and stuff like that. They basically, they had a prima facie, and they were the one that basically had the first shot at it because we could not declare. The idea is that they were able to, they could not stop it because there were no variances
We can stop
required.
this one. It requires a variance. It's
So
not wide
this one,
enough.
it requires a variance,
Right.
but the issue of buying or not the property by the town, it's not part of the variances that is required.
That's true, but it's part of
the
the
developer's agreement.
Right, it's part of the applicant's, the
I
way the
understand.
applicant pursues the subdivision application. So if the applicant would say, if the town is interested in purchasing this part of the property, here's where we would draw the line. Because, and then the planning board would consider the application.
This
you know,
way.
for-
And if
on
I
its
send
own
it to
merit.
another developer, here's where I'll draw the line.
Right.
But the applicant
basically-
the applicant draws the line as
Yeah.
to where they want it to be. And they can make that decision on where they want
The
to draw the
planning board
line.
decision is
on-
based on the line,
It's on
not
every-
on based on the line that they divide.
Right, but the applicant draws the line
Yeah.
where they propose it to be. The applicant can make that decision and in terms of its application based on anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
The temperature outside, all right? It could have nothing at all to do with the property, because the planning board considers the application on its own merits. The applicant decides, for some reason, whatever it is, I want to draw a line here. The planning board will consider the application based on its merits.
So
But
the
the
applicant now
makes-
is waiting for us to make a decision.
Because that will impact
And then,
where they
based
may
on
want
the
to draw a
decision,
line.
he was gonna change the line of the subdivision. potentially.
Right, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Right, the substance of this is,
Towns do this all the
Right.
time.
are we interested in saving historic property or not?
But
That's
that
all.
has nothing to do. He can sell it
But
and still
all-
keep it historic.
But, right, and as the examples before, 53 Knickerbocker, 87 County Road, the economics come square up against the historic preservation opportunities. And the same thing will happen here. I'm not advocating that we buy this, because we don't have any information right now. My only advocation is that if we're interested in saving historic property, we do our homework to understand what we're dealing with. And if we do our
Nope.
homework, if we don't like what we see, we don't do it.
Nobody's suggesting that there's a gun to our head,
Right.
that if we don't buy this, the house will come down. Nobody's suggesting that. One thing has nothing to do with the other. What we are suggesting is there's a potential scenario where the house would be saved and we purchase the property. We could possibly consider that scenario depending on the information that we gather. But nobody's suggesting if we say no, the house is going to be not going to be saved. We have to buy the property or the house is going to be saved. Nobody's saying that. And you know, we do have the ability to point blank save the house. If the HPC says we recommend it, we could move that process forward.
Yeah,
It's a not a-
they've already done that.
it's
They
not a-
recommended it.
It's not,
They
well,
did-
not,
they
they
didn't
haven't
get that.
formally recommended it because we have no notification of it.
All right, well,
But-
then we can save that
It's
by,
not the planning board.
if the planning board approve the historic house, we can save it. By
Okay,
approving it.
next is the Tenafly Swim Club bankruptcy update.
Who wants to do it? I can.
Yes.
Well, who put it on?
No, I don't know, but I knew it was gonna be on.
Thank you.
This is a simple, I heard ahead of the correspondence that we received that the trustee was going to abandon the lease. I think I had reported in closed, and it's not a secret anymore, that the person who had been interested in the lease never followed through, or for whatever reason decided not to proceed. And therefore, the trustee saw no value in the lease, considering the obligations that the swim club had, and has decided to abandon it, therefore turning over the property and the premises back to us. So we are now responsible for the property.
Now, we are responsible for the property. We're gonna lock it and not let anybody use it for the moment, because we don't wanna have any liabilities or anything.
I think it's been secured, and Julie,
DPW's already been
I think
taking
we've
care
done
of
that
it.
already.
Perfect.
We're
Yeah,
cleaning out the
and
And the
pool,
deal that we
remove
have
the
with the Board of
chemicals.
Ed will
Is-
take care of the parking lot.
The
Correct.
deal with the Board of Ed is now proceeding.
Yeah, perfect.
I know
So
there
then-
were a couple of issues as between the existing swim club and Board of Ed. I'm following the correspondence back and forth. They're trying to resolve their issues, and that is moving forward.
Mark,
I have a question to follow up on Max's question about the safety.
Mhm.
Okay, so the exterior is secured, but what about, should we be putting a fence immediately around the pool itself?
There's no water in the pool, by the way.
Well, but that's to my point, is someone could also
So-
fall
Fall
in a drunken stupor or otherwise, right?
I
in the
mean,
middle
they
of the
climb
night.
one fence but not the other.
There-
Well, I mean, it's like, what would be the
We
closest?
really should put a second fence.
Put a
in.
second fence around the pool itself.
Maybe some sort of,
Well,
and I don't know how
Mark, why don't we do
safety
this?
fences
Barbed
work.
wire,
Why
barbed
don't-
wire.
Oh, they can get the
Mark,
snow
why
fence.
why don't we ask our
Orange snow
insurance people what they recommend?
What they recommend, that's
What is
fine.
required? What is required?
Because I know property in town, you have a swimming pool in your property needs to be fenced in.
Yeah, both
Right.
of
If your exterior, if the border of your property is fenced in, you don't need one around the pool. But if
Correct.
you're not fenced in, then you need one around the
In
pool.
fact, we just
So one is
replaced some
enough,
of the fencing.
But that's a bad location, you're
Yeah,
right.
because you could imagine for the next,
Let's get a ruling
Yeah.
in writing from our insurance people telling us what they feel we should do.
and we should have the DP, because now that building is going to be, that whole area will be vacant for months before we decide what to do with it. We want to make sure the DPW is making sure the fences are always operating and it doesn't deteriorate.
That was checked. I know there was an
Yeah.
issue with the fence. And
Yeah, and once
they
again,
did.
we have, now that we have incurred the additional responsibility of maintaining the property. Not, I don't know, it's pretty hard to see into it, so it's really the exterior of the property that's gonna fall on our hands, unfortunately.
barbed wire.
Can I ask a question? the interior of it? Have we ensured and made sure that all of the chemicals and everything has been removed?
That's
Yes.
been addressed,
That was
yeah.
the first thing we
100%?
did.
Yeah.
In fact, they were actually taken by Tenafly Swim Club.
Thievery at its best.
No,
That's
not
great.
taken,
That's
but
great.
we offered and they
Well,
accepted.
I would add,
What offer for my pool?
I would add that I'm pleased,
Paid
I'm pleased to
$600
say
a
that
year.
Tenafly has done a good job of reaching out to the members of Tenafly and offering them a reasonable deal. Of course, the members of Tenafly are concerned, many of them will have lost their whatever bond money they
Yeah.
put
That
out.
was my
but,
question, yeah.
you know, if they spent several $100s on a bond 10 years ago, they got 10 years of use out of it. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality of it.
Also, just in front of the swim club, there's some benches and all that are broken and disrepair. I think we should have everything removed and, just to be on the safe side. Last thing we need is somebody getting hurt. And no tentacle can take those benches.
Last but not least under the old business list here, I wanted to put this on the agenda, and I'm going to be a little vague because I don't want to be specific at a public meeting at this point because it'd be counterproductive to what I'm going to say. There's some properties that are would be ideal for a project similar to what we did on Tenafly Road. If we were to, the borough were to purchase these properties using COA money, okay, that's what it's there for,
Mhm.
and partner with some organization to build something, this is the best way to get a significant number of COA credits. For example, on Tenafly Road, we got 10 credits, which is probably the largest amount of credits we've ever got at any one time. This property has the potential for much more than that, okay? And I'm talking probably no more than $1 million, maybe less of coal money. Now, the issue becomes, there's more than one property involved. It is the opinion of a couple of people that I've talked to that they all could be available at this particular time. But we need to act sooner rather than later because this is an opportunity that may disappear. And my suggestion is, I actually went spent a couple of days with a real estate attorney over the weekend, and I threw this at him to pick his brain. How would we as a borough go about purchasing property like this when there's different owners, et cetera? And the answer is you really have to engage a real estate broker to actively pursue this. Obviously, they're working for a commission, which is on the sale. Once again, this is all COA money, and what I would like to do is have permission, and I need Jewel and Bill to weigh in on this, on how we would go about engaging a real estate broker. I mean, I think what we would need to do is get somebody who's very involved in Tenafly, and you all know there's a half a dozen of them. How would we go about doing this? It would not cost us anything unless we decided eventually to purchase these properties. I don't want to identify the properties in public right now.
Would you do it by intended commission? I mean, with the banks, we do it by prospective interest
Well,
payment.
well, you think you're getting ahead of yourself though in terms of, I think the mayor was asking a different question, not compensation wise.
Well, not how much, well, percentage.
No, I'm talking about how do we go about
Go about
choosing
actually
somebody.
getting somebody.
No, but I was just saying, but that's part of it. I mean, you can do a solicitation,
Right.
but you have to have some measure, which are criteria for selection.
Well, because you're talking about the, this might be a better closed session.
Yeah, I think that we should take this as a closed session.
Or actually, you know what?
Because
Probably a good
how
thing
we
would be
discuss the
not-
method of.
Not to use Tenafly people at all. Go outside the boundaries of Tenafly.
Well,
You're not,
that's the whole-
not
that's-
using any
that-
Tenafly at all.
Excuse me.
Well, I didn't,
Now you started to discuss something that we really should talk about.
Let's do that in a closed
Okay,
session.
put this on the next week's closed session, please.
Next week?
Next week, that would be good if you want to
Can we have a
jump
5
on it.
minutes break?
No, keep
We're
going.
done,
Let's
I
go.
think.
We wanna get
We're
out of
done.
here.
There's
Good of the
there's some
business.
good stuff.
Yeah, but that's gonna take too long.
Good
Yeah.
order.
The next we'll have a closed session next week? Okay, we have 3 items in for the good of the order, and then if anybody else has anything as well. The first is testing of water for lead for private schools. Where are we, or what are we doing on this? Anything?
Well, I recommended that we make it mandatory that not, it's my understanding that all of Tenafly schools have done it. I want to make sure that
The
Mount
Tenafly is
Carmel,
al-
the JCC,
Tenafly is
the
already
Bobbitt Center,
tested, we are waiting for the results. Do
should
we
make
have?
sure
What
all
about our
of those
rec
facilities
schools?
should have
Do
them.
it?
Huh?
Rec? Our rec centers?
Yeah,
What?
every-
Our
What
rec
rec center?
center,
What rec center?
I mean,
do they do it too? Because
the
we have
fields,
water
all the
fountains
fields.
too.
What I'm asking
Do we
for
have-
is-
do we
These
have
are,
the-
these are matters that,
Do we have the authority to
I don't think,
force?
I don't think we can
require-
require private property owners to test their water.
Well-
That's something that's really, and I know there
Why
are
do we
some
require
things that
them to
are,
have smoke detectors?
Well, that's.
Well-
But that's because of state law.
the state authorization for
We're,
that.
we're enforcing
Well,
state law.
how about this? How about we get a next Board of Health meeting? We have the Board of Health make a recommendation to the mayor and council that we send a letter out to every private school and daycare facility, asking them to test the waters, their waters. And the Board of Health should have the expertise to tell us how to write that letter. And at the same time, we can,
But for what
Right.
level? Because I think the state is actually talking about
There's some,
changing the level.
there are discussions in Trenton about, requiring testing in, particularly in schools and changing the, levels of, lead contamination. That's ongoing now, and I think because of all of the national publicity this issue has gotten, we're gonna see some action there. I don't know if there's been anything introduced yet, but, or proposed, but, there's action in
Well,
Trenton about that.
From what I hear, I wouldn't be surprised if Trenton doesn't make it make a ruling saying that it's gonna be mandatory.
Mandatory.
well, if they
yeah.
do, that takes it out of our hands, but I think in the meantime, let's ask the Board of Health for a letter.
Recommendation of what to say.
Yeah, but
and what to
what
ask
Dan
for.
was saying, it's also very true. We have water fountains here all over. We need to test them here, otherwise we're liable for them.
In municipal facilities.
Municipal facilities, absolutely.
What does it cost to test the water?
I don't think it's a large
I don't think
expense.
it's.
No, and
We ask,
it's
Matt
that
and Bob
tasty, we
Culver
know.
to give us a list of the, wherever there's, water fountains, public water fountains. We have some in this building, we have some in some of the fields.
These facilities are modern enough that most of the problems come from old lead
Really old.
spurs from the.
We have to make sure, and then,
We don't. It would affect
I don't
all
think-
of the water in this whole building. It wouldn't be just because the plumbing here is not of
Well,
an
these,
age
the
that
tests
matter.
need to be at the end, not at the source.
yeah.
In other
Right.
words, you gotta test it at each water fountain.
Right.
Yeah.
The
Correct.
bathrooms,
Well, in bathrooms, there's no drinking water.
It's unlikely that that
You're gonna
the,
wash
Well,
it.
let's not get
spur
carried
would
away.
go in there.
I mean, you know.
Well, do we know if Mount Carmel School is that done?
Carmel would be one
That's been there
where,
a long
yeah.
time, that building.
No, so I'm saying,
Long time.
I don't believe we have the authority to require it, but we can request it.
Recommend it.
And recommend it, and we can, in the letter, we should say, we wait your responses to whether or not, as to when you'll be, we expect a response from every one of these schools and daycare centers as to when they're going to do it. If they come back and say they're not doing it, that's interesting publicity.
Well, we also maybe to put the language in the letter saying, don't be surprised if there's legislation that comes down. So why don't you do the smart thing?
In anticipation to statewide.
we recommend that you do
it now.
that
Okay,
for the
good.
safety of your
Safety of your,
parishioners and your school students.
students.
Parking issues, Max?
All right, okay, I have received over here a letter from Mr. Peter Kujamis and his over here. And basically, part of the letter was saying that in the part of the town where he lives, there is almost no parking anymore available because the commuters are taking over the roads, and he doesn't see the enforcement as it used to be. He has come back and told me that he has made a mistake over here, like one of the roads, Virginia Street, basically it's not a 15 minutes, it's a.
No, it wasn't, I'll correct you. Basically, is it okay for me to speak up?
Yeah, absolutely.
Basically, I've lived in this
There's a
town
response from
for
the chief.
37 years. And I've seen our streets become commuter parking lots. I mentioned to Councilman Bash, one of the streets, River Edge, Jefferson Road, almost all the way down to Sunset is commuters. I'm not the only one who's observed this. A lot of my neighbors have observed it. Actually, at one point, both sides of Jefferson Avenue, from River Edge to Sunset, were just bumper to bumper with commuter cars. But the school, somebody must have seen the issue, has put signs up on the school side of McKay that limit parking between certain hours.
That
So
wasn't
that
the school.
eliminates,
That
that
wasn't the
eliminates
school.
the commuter.
That was the school.
Okay.
The borough, that's by ordinance. Schools, and nobody can just put signs up there.
All right, Virginia Street, through all the years I've lived here, has had a 15-minute parking, which is a very, very good rule around schools and playgrounds. Some of the signs have come down, and now you see cars. I'm observant because I no longer work. So I walk down the street many times, I'll see that same car sitting there 2-3 hours, sometimes 4 hours. Yes, there's a 15-minute limit, but as I said, some of the signs between the signs have come down, so people will take advantage of it. They'll say, we didn't see the sign, because there's no longer one sign after the other.
Yeah.
I mentioned Mr. Bash, it's not just my street, because I've lived here for 37 years. If you go to Ingle Street from Hewlett, where David Johnson Park is, all the way to Temple Sinai, where the Inglewood border begins, both sides, it's a massive parking lot.
We're well aware of that, and that was created when we eliminated parking on the side streets. We put restrictions on all of the side streets along Engle Street where the bus runs. So basically, push the cars onto Engle Street because Engle Street can support it better than the side streets. Now, over the last couple of years, there has been an increase in the number of commuter cars parking on Engle Street. My concern is when Stop and Shop opens up again, if they go ahead with what they've suggested and they're going to regulate their parking lot, which has been a place where a lot of commuters have parked, those commuters are going to go elsewhere. And at some point in time, this body will have to look at what we might want to do, because a lot of commuters are from out of town. Now, some of them aren't. Some of them are residents that just take their car from wherever they live in Tenafly and park up closer to a bus stop. But it'll be this body that has to decide what to do on Engle Street. Now, in answer to your letter, which Max provided all of us, it was given to the police chief. The police chief has, I'm going to read this since you haven't seen it. The mention of cars on parking on Virginia and Esmond Place sometimes all day for potential commuter parking purposes, the chief finds to be inaccurate. A check with the traffic division revealed that no finding of his complaint. Additionally, the chief drove to the two streets at 11 a.m. last Friday and failed to observe any vehicles parked on either street. And he has pictures of the streets with no, and then Captain Trainer inspected the same areas today, which is Tuesday, around the same time, didn't see a single vehicle parked on either Virginia or Esmond Place. So he's also, he mentioned Hillside is not 15-minute parking.
It's 2 hours.
So
I made a mistake.
I don't have to be told. I understand what you're saying about Engle Street. However,
And
you know,
Jefferson.
whenever we get
Peter, Jefferson Avenue has always, since I've lived in this town, that side has always been used for both the teachers as well as parents.
Right.
And I've been using Jefferson Avenue, I don't know how many times. And I've never seen a commuter ever park there and walk to that
Then,
bus stop.
when you
Truthfully.
walk by at 6:30, 7 o'clock at night, and there's cars on Jefferson Avenue, they're not for an athletic event, because sometimes there are no athletic events, one of the neighbors on Virginia Street, who's a teacher, I believe, not in a local school, mentioned to me, he says, "You're right. I always see a Jeep convertible parked on that street over and over again." In lieu of Mayor Rustin's remark about a car, last Thursday, one of my neighbors, because she comes home so late, I would have mentioned for her to join me tonight, but she wasn't there, right across from her house, she waited and I waited. A commuter got off the bus. It was there all day. At 8:30 p.m., he opened his car.
What street is this?
Esmond.
Okay, well.
And she was there, and she actually wrote a note
There's no
telling him
sign on this.
that.
Yeah, I need to say something about this too. After I got your letter, I wanted to do my own due diligence because I
Yes.
didn't want to, before I presented, I wanted to do it. I didn't do it in the places where you, because I wanted to see if this is a general issue or it's just an issue in your location. So I went to the CVS parking lot and I parked 3 cars. Came back 2.5 hours later, the same 3 cars were there. So they are over there using the commuter space. I don't have to mention the fact that I went by the Stop and Shop, which is closed, but the parking lot is full.
Well, there's a lot of construction.
Yeah, I
work.
saw that. I figure out 20, 30 people of construction, 100 cars.
Nobody, well, first of all,
And
to
let me
this
finish.
point, the Stop and Shop is a private
It's a
lot.
private,
Yeah.
We don't enforce it. But they're going, they put
Yeah,
signage up.
but I'm gonna go back to that, so the CVS parking lot is ours. Then I went on Railroad Avenue in the part that is facing the Stop and Shop, which basically has signs going north saying that it's by permit only. There were like 20 cars parked over there. None of them had any signs for permit.
That's not true. I checked it, I've
Okay.
been checking it the last couple of weeks, and they are permitted. They-
Okay,
On the side, rear view mirror of the permits.
The rear view, there were 2 cars have, and like 6 cars didn't have.
Well, that's a matter of enforcement too.
Exactly. So, but that's the whole thing. The whole thing is enforcement. Nothing else but enforcement. And I think that we need to make sure, like going through this parking lots of the CVS and doing what I do can be done so easily. And that would alleviate the business district problems
Well, we
they
can
have.
we can remind the chief that we're serious about enforcement in our restricted lots.
Yes.
Jefferson Avenue, you cannot do anything with.
No, Jefferson Avenue is
You
mostly
cannot,
the
you
schools.
cannot.
Yeah,
I mean, there
didn't
may
even
be some
say-
commuters
that's why I
mixed
went
in.
through the other.
No, it's open.
But
That's why I went through the
and
other
even
places.
even in the evening, there are activities in McKay School that create.
Yeah.
I know if there's a
Yeah.
basketball game in the gym at McKay School, it's hard to park there.
Yeah,
Well-
but that's the whole point.
But-
The enforcement has to
But
be.
like the lot.
But the
city-
chief also points out that it's not illegal to be a commuter.
Right, and it's, where
If
there's
you,
no.
if you park in a legal place,
Yeah, exactly.
but if you park in an illegal place,
I think
like
at
the
some point in
CVS.
time, we're gonna have to address this. Thank you.
Could you also be careful?
Not now, not now.
All right.
Last but
The
not
last
least.
but not least, when I was part of the senior citizen group, they were asking if we can have a proclamation because it's senior citizen
Yeah,
Old
give it to
American
Lisette,
Month.
give a sample.
Yeah, and
to
yeah,
Lisette.
I think that there, I attached, the samples are there. I think it, because the senior citizen are the one that we have to take care of specifically, all right.
I think you need to recuse yourself, you're a senior citizen.
I'm only 42 and a half, and another half.
Does anybody else have anything else?
I just want to, for the record, say that Tenafly has lost a true icon with the passing of Ray Rankin. He's over a 55-year resident in this town, and it's
You know,
another
that
one of
one's
our
done
good
now.
ones gone.
Was he a fireman?
No.
We had him as a grand marshal about 5, 6
That's right.
years ago.
He was, yeah.
Ray Rankin.
Oh, Ray Rankin,
Yeah,
yeah.
we honored him on Memorial Day.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Yes, you said.
Some of them.
All in
Some of
favor?
them. Yes.
Thank you.
You said you wanted to go to the.
A lot